My name is Emily Parker, and I've always thought I had a pretty normal life. I grew up in a small town in Indiana, married my college sweetheart, and settled into what I thought was a picture-perfect life. My husband, Jake, is a structural engineer, steady, reliable, the type of man who makes plans 5 years ahead and keeps his promises no matter what. We met at Purdue University and got married 2 years after graduation. Everything seemed predictable, and honestly, I liked it that way. But one evening, everything changed. What Jake asked of me shattered the very foundation of what I believed about our relationship and about him. It was a Thursday evening in early spring. The air smelled like rain, and our golden retriever, Bailey, was curled up at Jake's feet while he sat on the couch flipping through the news on his tablet. I was finishing up dinner, grilled salmon and roasted veggies, something Jake always looked forward to after a long day. Everything was ordinary, routine, until it wasn't. Jake cleared his throat the way he always did when he was nervous or about to talk about something serious. I knew him too well. I turned from the kitchen counter and looked at him. "Everything okay?" I asked, drying my hands on a dish towel. He nodded slowly, then looked up at me with eyes that seemed unusually distant. "There's something I've been thinking about for a long time, Em. And I need to ask you something. It's big." I laughed nervously. "You're not dying or anything, right?" No, he said quickly, shaking his head. "Nothing like that. But it's complicated." I put the dish towel down and walked over to sit beside him. "Okay. I'm listening." He took a deep breath. "I want to leave everything behind and move off the grid. No phones. No internet. Just us in a cabin in Montana or Wyoming. Somewhere remote. For good." I blinked. For a moment, I genuinely thought he was joking. "Jake, what are you talking about?" "I'm serious," he said, his voice steady. "I've been feeling like everything in our lives is too crowded. Too artificial. Work, emails, the constant buzz of technology. I feel like I'm suffocating in a life that doesn't feel real anymore." I stared at him in disbelief. "You want to quit your job, sell the house, and disappear into the woods?" He nodded. "Yes." I stood up, trying to process what I had just heard. My heart was pounding. This wasn't the man I married, or, at least, not the version of him I thought I knew. "I can't believe you're serious," I whispered. "You're the most practical person I know. You have meetings booked for the next 6 months. You're working on a city project." "I know," he said quietly. "But I'm tired. Emily, I can't do this anymore. I want a different life, one where we grow our own food, wake up to silence instead of alarms, and spend time really living, not just existing." I didn't know what to say. Part of me admired his courage, his honesty. But the other part, the much louder part, was panicked. How could I give up everything we'd built? The next few days were a blur of tension and confusion. I went to work like usual at the local design firm, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about Jake's face when he made the request. He hadn't looked wild or unstable. He looked free, hopeful, as if he had already stepped into a new chapter and was just waiting for me to follow. I talked to my best friend, Rachel, over coffee that weekend. She'd been married twice and had a way of cutting through emotional fog with brutal honesty. "Girl," she said, stirring her latte, "this isn't just a weird phase. It sounds like a midlife epiphany." "Yeah, but Jake's only 37. "Exactly. The age when a man either buys a boat, grows a beard, or starts talking about off-grid living. You got the last one." I laughed for the first time in days. "But seriously," she continued, "do you want that kind of life? Be honest." I didn't know how to answer, because part of me did. There was something incredibly romantic about the idea of leaving the noise behind and building a life in nature. But then I thought of my job, my friends, my yoga classes, my parents just 3 hours away. I thought of Target runs and movie nights and getting dressed for brunch. Could I give it all up? Jake wasn't pressuring me. In fact, he barely brought it up again after that night. But he was different. He was happier. Calmer. I noticed him taking long walks alone, sketching cabin layouts in a notebook, and watching documentaries about sustainable living. He was falling in love with a dream, and I didn't know if I could be a part of it. One night, I walked into our room and found him sitting on the floor, reading a book called The Simple Life: Lessons from the Wilderness. I thought we could go visit a few places, he said, looking up. Just to see what's out there. No commitment. Just a road trip. I agreed, thinking that maybe seeing the reality of off-grid life would change his mind. We planned a 2-week trip through Wyoming and Montana. We stayed in small cabins, met people who had left city life behind, and even chopped wood together. There were moments I hated it, like when a pipe froze or when we got stuck in mud miles from the nearest gas station. But then there were sunsets over mountain ranges, the sound of owls at night, and the quiet conversations we had by firelight that reminded me of why I fell in love with Jake in the first place. By the end of the trip, I still didn't have an answer. But I knew the life Jake wanted wasn't a fantasy. It was possible. Back home, things were quieter. Jake stopped talking about it so much, giving me space to think.
And I did.
Every night. Sometimes I cried, overwhelmed by the weight of such a life-changing decision. One evening, I found myself sitting on our porch with Bailey asleep beside me. I watched the sunset and thought, what if I say yes? What if I jump, just once, without knowing where I'll land? I went inside, sat down next to Jake, and took his hand. I'm scared, I told him honestly, but I'll do it. If we can take it slow. If we can plan it together. His eyes welled up and he nodded. Of course. Over the next 6 months, we sold our house, left our jobs, and moved to a small piece of land in northern Montana. It wasn't easy. We made mistakes. We argued. I missed Target and Rachel and having fast internet.
But we also laughed.
We planted our own food. We watched deer wander into our yard. Jake built us a greenhouse, and I painted the interior of our cabin with warm colors that made it feel like home. It wasn't the life I imagined when I married Jake, but in a way it was better. Because it wasn't about comfort, it was about connection.
To each other.
To the earth. To something deeper than deadlines and notifications. Sometimes life throws you a request that shakes everything you thought was true. Jake's request did that for me. But in the end, it led us to a version of ourselves that neither of us knew we needed. And for that, I'll always be grateful.